Most people don't know this, but the reason they're not respected isn't because they're not good enough. It's because they haven't yet respected themselves enough to demand it without saying a word. Carl Jung, the legendary Swiss psychoanalyst, didn't just study the mind, he studied the soul. And he knew something that most modern thinkers are too afraid to say: if you don't respect yourself first, no one else ever truly will. Not your friends, not your partner, not your boss, not even your family. Because respect doesn't begin with how others treat you, it begins with the energy you radiate about how you treat yourself. Let's start with a brutal but necessary question. What are you silently teaching the world to believe about you? Through your posture, your tone, your boundaries or lack of them, every day you are broadcasting a signal. And that signal is either, I know my worth, or I'm still negotiating it. Jung understood that the unconscious mind is always communicating, even when the mouth is silent. And if your unconscious is still full of self-doubt, self-betrayal, and quiet self-loathing, people feel it. They don't always know why, but something in them says, this person doesn't hold themselves in high esteem, why should I?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now, here's where it gets deep. Jung believed that the most dangerous thing in the world is the unlived life. The part of yourself that you've repressed, ignored, or abandoned in order to fit in, be accepted, or avoid pain. And what does that have to do with respect? Everything. Because when you abandon parts of yourself to keep the peace, you fracture your integrity. You split your psyche, and over time you begin to resent yourself for not standing tall. You lose your center, and the world responds to that fracture not with compassion, but with disregard. Because the world reflects what you silently accept. That's not cruelty, that's psychology. That's the mirror of the unconscious. Let me ask you something that might pierce. Where in your life are you allowing disrespect because you haven't fully respected yourself yet? Is it a relationship where you're always over-giving and under-receiving? Is it a job where your brilliance goes unnoticed because you haven't spoken up? Is it a friendship where you shrink to be liked? Jung would say, that's your shadow speaking. That's the part of you that doesn't believe it has the right to take up space. And until you integrate that shadow, until you face it, own it, and transform it, you will live under its rule. This is the paradox. People think self-respect is soft. But it's not. It's violent in the best way. Violent in how it cuts through illusion. Violent in how it says no to mediocrity. Violent in how it refuses to stay small. Jung's work was never about becoming nice. It was about becoming whole. And wholeness demands that you reclaim the parts of you that were shamed, silenced, or suppressed. Because only a whole person can command real respect. Let's talk about boundaries. Most people don't realize that boundaries are not walls, they're mirrors. They don't just protect you, they show people who you are. When you say, I don't tolerate disrespect, and actually mean it, you're not just setting a rule, you're revealing your self-concept. And Jung would argue that your self-concept is the blueprint for your destiny. But if you see yourself as weak, you will attract people who confirm that. But if you see yourself as worthy, you will repel those who can't handle your strength. This isn't magic, it's psychology in motion. But here's the trap. We've been taught to conflate respect with approval. To think that if someone doesn't like us, it means we're not worthy. Jung would destroy that illusion. He'd say, the more you grow into your authentic self, the more rejection you will face, but that rejection is a sign you're on the right path. Because the people who are comfortable with your smaller self will resist your expansion, and you must be strong enough to let them go. That's the real test of self-respect, not how you treat yourself when everyone loves you, but how you stand tall when people leave because you finally stopped shrinking. Let's make this real. Think about how many times you've betrayed yourself to keep someone else comfortable. How many times you've said yes when your soul screamed no. How many times you've laughed at a joke that cut you just to avoid seeming too sensitive. Jung would say every one of those moments leaves a mark, a psychic scar that says you mattered less. And over time, those scars pile up until you forget what it feels like to be whole. But here's the good news, you can reverse it. You can reclaim those lost fragments, one boundary at a time, one truth at a time, one refusal to self-betray at a time. This is what Jung meant when he said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Respect doesn't come from chasing status, applause, or validation. It comes from inner congruence, from looking inside, seeing your mess, your darkness, your wounds, and choosing to honor yourself anyway. That's self-respect, and that's the only kind of respect that lasts. So I'll ask you this, what would your life look like if every decision you made came from deep, unapologetic self-respect? Would you still be in the same job? The same relationship? Would you still speak the same way, dress the same way, tolerate the same disrespect? Or would you walk differently, speak differently, command a different kind of energy? That's not ego, that's alignment. And the world responds to alignment. People feel it. They don't even know why. But when you walk in a room with full self-respect, they either rise to meet you or disappear. And both outcomes are gifts. But Jung didn't want you to become perfect. He wanted you to become real. Because realness is magnetic. Realness is sacred. Realness is respected not by everyone, but by the right ones. And that's all that ever mattered. Shadow and self-worth, why owning your darkness is the key to real confidence. Let's begin with a concept that Carl Jung built his entire philosophy around, the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It's not your enemy. It's not the bad part of you, it's the rejected part. The part you were taught to hide. The part you were punished for expressing. The part you buried so deeply that you forgot it was even there. But here's the hard truth. What you reject within yourself doesn't disappear, it controls you from the dark. And until you own your shadow, you will never fully respect yourself. Because deep down, you'll always know you're hiding. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's it. That's the rule. If you want unshakable self-respect, the kind that radiates without arrogance, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself, you must confront the parts of yourself you've been most afraid to face. Your anger, your envy, your selfishness, your desire for power, your fear of being seen, all of it. Because until you integrate those shadows, they operate in secret. They sabotage your confidence. They pollute your energy. They infect your relationships, and they make you feel like an imposter in your own life. Let me ask you a piercing question. What part of yourself are you most afraid others will discover? That question isn't meant to shame you. It's meant to free you. Because the moment you name that part, you begin to reclaim it. You stop letting it control you. You stop needing to hide. And that's where real self-respect begins, not in pretending to be perfect, but in standing tall in your complexity. Think about this. We admire people with depth, with intensity, with mystery. But where do those qualities come from? They come from the integration of opposites, from someone who has walked through their own fire and returned with wisdom. You cannot have depth without darkness. You cannot have confidence without conflict. You cannot have self-respect without self-reckoning. Jung knew this. He wasn't trying to help people become pure. He was trying to help them become whole. But here's the twist. Most people think confidence means having all the answers. It doesn't. Real confidence is being able to say, I don't have all the answers, but I trust myself to face whatever comes. And that trust, it's born in the shadow, in the nights you cried but kept going, in the mistakes you made and owned, in the parts of your story you thought would destroy you but didn't. Every time you survive something you thought would break you, your shadow transforms from a prison into a source of power. And people feel that. Have you ever met someone who's been through hell but doesn't hide it? Someone who speaks with calm self-respect, not because they're loud, but because they've faced their own darkness and come out the other side. That's what Jung meant by individuation. It's the process of becoming your full self, not your polished self, but not your curated social media self, your real self. And the paradox is, once you become real, you become respected in a way that no performance could ever earn. Let's go deeper. Jung believed that every human being has a persona, the mask we wear to function in society. But if you mistake the mask for your identity, you lose yourself. You start performing instead of living. You start managing impressions instead of following instincts. And that's a recipe for quiet self-hatred. Because deep down, your soul knows when you're faking it. And if you fake it long enough, you start to believe you don't deserve respect. Because the truth is, you don't respect yourself when you're hiding. You can't. Because respect requires truth, and truth requires integration. So how do we begin to integrate the shadow? It starts with radical honesty, not performative vulnerability, but not curated confession, but the kind of honesty that hurts, that strips away your illusions, that forces you to look in the mirror and say, yes, I've been weak. Yes, I've been jealous. Yes, I've lied. Yes, I've played small, and I'm still worthy. That's courage. That's self-respect. That's the beginning of becoming indestructible. And here's the practical result. Once you own your shadow, no one can use it against you. You stop being blackmailable. You stop being manipulatable. You stop being thrown off by criticism because you've already faced your worst fears and survived. You become calm, grounded, centered. And from that place, you radiate a quiet power that demands respect without ever having to ask for it. Let me ask you this. What if the very thing you're ashamed of is the key to your strength? What if your anger, properly channeled, could become your boundary? What if your sadness could become your empathy? What if your fear could become the fire that drives your transformation? That's what Jung saw in every client he worked with, not just pathology, but potential. And that's what I see in you. You don't need to become someone else to be respected. You need to become more of who you already are, but without filters, without fear, without apology. That's what self-respect looks like. Imagine this: you walk into a room fully present, not because you need to impress, but because you have nothing to hide. You speak with clarity, not volume. You move with purpose, not performance. You listen without needing to defend. You exist without needing permission. That is the psychological energy of someone who has owned their shadow. And people respect it not because they understand it, but because it feels real. So the next time you feel the urge to shrink, to hide, to perform, pause. Ask yourself, am I acting from my mask or from my truth? Because only one of those places will lead you to the life you're meant to live. You want to be respected? Then begin where Jung began, with the parts of yourself you're most afraid of. Bring them home, integrate them, respect them. And in doing so, you'll teach the world how to treat you not with fear, not with pity, not with condescension, but with deep, enduring respect. The final test of self-respect: walking alone, speaking truth, and becoming unshakable. Now we arrive at the part most people never make it to. The space where self-respect is no longer a concept, it's a battlefield. You can read every book, repeat every mantra, write down every affirmation, but until you've walked alone, spoken truth that costs you something, and stood firm while others try to bend you, you haven't yet earned the kind of self-respect that Carl Jung spoke of. Because true self-respect doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being aligned, and alignment is expensive. The price? Comfort, approval, familiarity. But the reward? You become unshakable. Let's begin with the hardest truth. If you want to respect yourself, you must be willing to disappoint others. Not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of integrity. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires separation from the crowd. Why? Because the crowd doesn't want individuals. It wants conformity. It wants safety. It wants you to be predictable. When you start honoring your truth, setting boundaries, owning your shadow, and speaking with clarity, something terrifying happens. People start to leave. Or worse, they try to pull you back into your former version, the one that kept them comfortable. And here's where most people fail the final test of self-respect. They confuse loneliness with being wrong. They think, if I'm alone, I must have made a mistake. But Jung would tell you, no, you're alone because you're finally telling the truth. And truth is always lonely at first, because so few people are strong enough to hear it. But if you can endure that loneliness, if you can walk through that desert without turning back for comfort, you reach something sacred on the other side: self-trust. Self-trust is the backbone of self-respect. It's the voice inside that says, even if no one else agrees, I know what's right for me. And that voice only gets louder when you learn to follow it in the dark. Jung said, solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living. He didn't mean isolation, he meant inner solitude. The kind that emerges when you no longer abandon yourself for applause. when your center becomes stronger than the storm outside. Let me ask you something real. What truth have you been avoiding because you're afraid it will cost you connection? That's the truth that holds your freedom. That's the truth that will either set you apart or keep you shackled, depending on how you respond to it. Most people suppress their truth because they think it will break their life. But suppressing your truth doesn't protect your life, it shrinks it. It turns you into a ghost, present but not alive, visible but not real. And people can feel that. They may not say it out loud, but they'll start treating you like the version of yourself you're pretending to be. And you'll wonder why you feel invisible. The answer: you made yourself disappear first. So how do we stop disappearing? By speaking, first to ourselves, then to others. Not loudly, not aggressively, but steadily. You say, "This is who I am now. This is what I believe. This is what I will no longer accept." And when the world pushes back, as it always does, you don't flinch. You don't fight. You remain. That's what it means to be unshakable. Not to be aggressive, but to be rooted. Imagine this: a tree in the middle of a storm. The wind howls, the rain lashes, branches bend. But the trunk, it endures, because it's rooted in something deeper than the weather. That's who you become when you respect yourself. Not immune to challenge, but centered in your response. You no longer chase validation. You no longer over-explain. You no longer negotiate your worth. You simply are. And in that stillness, people begin to respect you not because you asked for it, but because your presence demands it. And here's the twist: the moment you stop needing respect from others, they begin to offer it freely. That's the law of energy. Jung understood that the psyche responds not to words, but to integrity. When you embody what you believe, the world feels it. You could say nothing and still be heard, but that's the silent authority of the self-respecting soul. But it doesn't end there. Self-respect isn't just about how you treat yourself. It's about how you show others what's possible. When you walk in your truth, you give others permission to do the same. When you refuse to self-abandon, you become a mirror to everyone else who's still hiding. That's why self-respect is the most generous thing you can cultivate. Because it doesn't just free you, it frees everyone watching you. Let me ask you one last question, and let it echo in you long after this video ends. But what would your life look like if you truly believed you were worthy of profound respect, not because of what you've done, but because of who you are? How would you speak? Who would you keep? What would you no longer tolerate? Because the truth is, no one can give you respect that you haven't already claimed. And no one can take from you what you've already made peace with. Respect yourself first, not as a tactic, not as a performance, but as a declaration, a spiritual contract with your future self. One that says, "I will no longer betray my soul for safety. I will no longer shrink so others don't feel threatened. I will walk alone if I must, but I will never again abandon myself." That's not ego, that's evolution. That's not arrogance. That's alchemy, and that's the final test. When you pass it, you don't just earn respect, you become it.